Today's story is about a couple who were truly immersed in love, but as soon as they got married, their life took a terrifying turn, changing everything. This is not just an ordinary story, but one that shows how sometimes, behind the dreams of love, lies a truth that shakes a person's very existence. A destination where fear and reality merge. In today's story, we will talk about a married couple who started a new journey with every hope of love, but fate showed them a path where they lost themselves forever. Aidan and Emily's love story was like a dream. They were truly in love, and their hearts were filled with nothing but affection for each other. When Aidan decided to make Emily his life partner, he knew this would be a new beginning. Their relationship was flawless, and it was filled with joy and happiness. Emily and Aidan's wedding was beautiful. On that perfect day, Emily said, "I do" to Aidan in front of her parents and friends, and they both embarked on a new journey together. On their wedding day, Aidan's eyes were sparkling with a special glow, and Emily's smile carried a sense of peace that no one could understand. Their new chapter in life had begun, and their love made the day even more special. However, as soon as they reached their new home, something happened that turned their life upside down. Aidan and Emily had imagined that after their marriage, they would live a life without any difficulties. But reality was something entirely different. It was nighttime, and both Aidan and Emily were lying comfortably in their bed. Aidan's eyes had closed, and he was fast asleep, while Emily struggled to control her heartbeat. They were close to each other, and their hearts were full of love. But as Emily began to close her eyes, she felt something strange. Emily heard a strange sound. It was faint, like someone had quietly opened the door. The sound unsettled her. She glanced at Aidan, but he was deep asleep. Emily thought to herself that it was probably just her imagination, but she couldn't shake off the unease. She lit a lamp and walked toward the door. When she opened it, there was nothing there. The house was silent, but still something felt off. The next day, both Aidan and Emily decided to dismiss the incident as nothing but a figment of her imagination, but Emily's heart was still uneasy. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but Aidan reassured her that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. The second night, the same thing happened again. Emily closed her eyes, and once again, she heard the faint sound of footsteps, as if someone was entering the room. Her heart raced, and she woke up. She shook Aidan awake, but he was still oblivious to everything. This was the moment when Emily first realized that something strange was happening in their lives. A fear had begun to creep into their hearts, and it was the first time they both questioned whether they were living in a dream or in reality. This fear wasn't something that would vanish after a single night. Each night, the fear grew stronger, and Emily felt that some things were slipping out of their control. But Aidan always reassured her, telling her that it was just her imagination. One day, Emily made up her mind that she would confront this fear. She decided to awaken the strength within her and told Aidan that she was ready to face the terror. Aidan comforted her and promised that he would be by her side, but deep inside, he too felt a fear he had never expressed before. One day, Emily and Aidan decided they would find a solution to this strange phenomenon. They both went to an ancient library where there were some mysterious books. One particular book caught Emily's attention. This book was about an ancient spirit called Shambiria. According to the book, Shambiria was a spirit that created fear between married couples, destroying their love. The spirit was present in their lives, and until they confronted it, it would remain with them. Aidan and Emily decided they would face this spirit. But little did they know, the truth behind this spirit would change their lives forever. Emily and Aidan's hearts were no longer at peace. The calmness they had once shared seemed to vanish, replaced by a creeping terror. They were beginning to believe that the entity described in the Shambiria book was real, and it was now tormenting their lives. Aidan had started to accept that something was deeply wrong, and he felt an unsettling presence around them, one that grew stronger each day. That night, Emily and Aidan made a decision. They would confront this terror head-on. Together, they sat down to read the rest of the book to uncover more information about the creature. As they read through the pages, they discovered something shocking. Shambiria would only leave them if they made a true sacrifice. The book mentioned that the creature fed off their love, manipulating their emotions, and the only way to rid themselves of it was through an act that proved their devotion. Emily, determined to end the nightmare, turned to Aidan. "We have to face this. It's our test," she said. But Aidan's eyes held a glimmer of fear. He knew this was not going to be easy, and the truth was starting to sink in. This was no ordinary fight. Still, he nodded, choosing to stand by Emily's side. They agreed to visit the place mentioned in the book, the site where Shambiria was believed to be the strongest. The book spoke of an ancient cave outside the city, a forgotten place no one dared approach. The next morning, Aidan and Emily set out, feeling a growing sense of dread in their hearts. They knew the task ahead was not a simple one. As they drove out of the city, the silence between them was deafening. They arrived at the desolate spot where the cave lay hidden in the wilderness. It was a place untouched by time, abandoned by the world. The air was thick with an eerie stillness. Without speaking a word, they walked toward the cave, each step more reluctant than the last. The closer they got, the colder the air seemed to grow. A sense of unease settled over them like a heavy blanket. Emily clutched Aidan's hand tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. They were both scared, but they were determined to face whatever awaited them. As they entered the cave, they were greeted by an unnatural silence. The walls seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if something was watching them. Emily's breath quickened. She could almost hear whispers in the air, though there was no one around. "Aidan, do you hear that?" Emily asked in a shaky voice. Aidan didn't respond immediately. He was looking around, his gaze darting from one shadowy corner to the next. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he pushed the fear aside and stepped forward. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and an unsettling scent filled the cave, something foul like decay. A cold shiver ran down their spines as they moved deeper into the cave. That's when they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. "Who's there?" Aidan called out, his voice echoing in the dark. There was no answer, only the sound of something moving closer. Emily felt a chill grip her heart. Then, as if from nowhere, a shadow appeared, tall, dark, and formless. Its eyes glowed a menacing red, casting an eerie light across the cave walls. "It's her," Emily whispered in horror. "It's the creature from the book." The shadow moved toward them, its voice like a rasping whisper. "You think you can defeat me?" it said, its tone cold and mocking. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "We will defeat you. We are not afraid." The creature's laugh was chilling, a sound that seemed to echo in every corner of the cave. "You say you are not afraid, but you don't understand what you are up against." Aidan stepped closer to Emily, his grip tightening on her hand. The creature's red eyes glowed brighter, and the temperature dropped even further. A sense of helplessness filled them both, but they knew there was no turning back. "Do you truly believe you can escape me?" the creature hissed, its voice growing louder, the sound reverberating through the cave. In that moment, they both realized that what they were dealing with was beyond any terror they had ever known. The creature was more than just a shadow. It was a living nightmare, one that fed off fear, love, and despair. They had no choice but to face it, to find a way to end the terror once and for all. But what sacrifices would they have to make? And could they truly escape the clutches of Shambiria, or were they already too deep into its web to free themselves? As the creature moved closer, the shadows seemed to close in on them, leaving them with no escape. Would Aidan and Emily be able to break free from its grasp, or would they be trapped in this nightmare forever? As the shadow of Shambiria loomed closer, Emily and Aidan's hearts raced. Fear weighed heavily on them, but they both knew there was no turning back. The looming figure, once confined to the pages of a book, had come to life. With every step it took toward them, the fear in the air grew stronger, and it felt as if the very ground beneath their feet was shifting. They realized they were facing a truth they had long tried to ignore, one that was far more terrifying than any of them had imagined. Shambiria's presence, once just a myth, was now undeniable. The shadow crept closer, its shape becoming more defined, radiating power and terror. The two of them, still gripped by disbelief, exchanged a glance. Aidan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We have to fight this, Emily," Aidan whispered, trying to reassure her. Emily nodded, her hands trembling, but she didn't show her fear. "We have to face this, or it will never end." Shambiria's laughter filled the air, dark, menacing, and cold. It sent chills down their spines. "You think you can escape me?" The voice was low, and it echoed around them, as if the very walls were speaking. "We're not afraid of your power," Emily said, trying to sound confident, though her voice shook. She knew they had to stand strong, but deep down, fear gnawed at her. "How long do you think your courage will last?" Shambiria's voice grew louder, more intense, as though the ground itself were shaking beneath their feet. Aidan squeezed Emily's hand. "We're ready to fight," he said, though his own voice betrayed his fear. Shambiria drew closer, its form becoming almost tangible. It leaned in, its presence overwhelming. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know your secrets, your fears, your weaknesses. Everything you've ever hidden, it's all mine now. Eden and Emily locked eyes. The realization that Shambiria knew everything about them, everything they had kept buried deep within, was overwhelming. The very core of their relationship, the love that had once been their strength, was now being twisted into something darker. Shambiria's form was now so close they could feel its coldness on their skin. Your love is weak. It's nothing but a distraction. It's only a matter of time before your fear consumes you, and I'll be the one to make you face it. Together, Eden said, his voice unwavering despite the terror. We will fight together. Emily stood firm, her fear momentarily fading. Our love is our strength. We'll never let it defeat us. Shambiria smirked, a cruel grin twisting its face. Love? Is that what you call it? A fleeting emotion, something that can easily be broken. I've seen it happen before. Your love will crumble, just like everything else. You're wrong, Emily said, her voice growing stronger. Our love is unbreakable. You can't take that from us. Shambiria hissed, stepping back, its presence growing even darker. We'll see how long you can keep that belief, it said, and with that, it vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence in its wake. But even as the shadows receded, Emily and Eden knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness they faced was not gone, just waiting for the right moment to return. And this time, they had to be ready. We won't let it win, Eden whispered, his grip on Emily's hand tightening. We will fight. Together. And with that promise, they began the true fight. Not just against Shambiria, but against the fear that had taken root within their own hearts. The love they shared was their greatest weapon, but they knew it would be tested like never before. The days following their first encounter with Shambiria were filled with unease and tension. Emily and Eden tried to go about their lives, but they knew deep down that their world had irrevocably changed. Every noise in the house felt amplified, every shadow felt like it was watching them. It wasn't just the physical presence of Shambiria that haunted them. It was the fear that something even darker was waiting to come. Eden sat up in bed one night, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Emily slept peacefully beside him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He had to find a way to protect her, to protect both of them, from whatever Shambiria had planned. He glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Something was coming. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. He slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to disturb Emily. The house was eerily still. The only sound was the faint hum of the old air conditioning. As he walked through the dark hallway, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His footsteps echoed in the silence, but it felt like something was following him, lurking just out of sight. He shook the thought away, pushing himself forward. Eden knew the key to stopping Shambiria lay in uncovering the curse. He couldn't ignore the connection between the entity and the darkness that had enveloped their lives since they'd moved into the old house. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything had shifted. But why? What did Shambiria want with them? He made his way to the study, where he had been gathering old journals and books to research the house's history. There had to be something, some clue, that could help him break the curse. As he flipped through a dusty old book, a single page caught his attention. It was an old journal entry, handwritten in a hurried, almost frantic script. The curse has been awakened. The darkness cannot be escaped. The house is alive, feeding on the fears of its inhabitants. Only love, pure and unbroken, can undo what has been set in motion. But even love, in the face of such terror, will face its greatest test. And if it falls, all will be lost. Eden's heart skipped a beat. The words seemed to speak directly to him, to them. Pure love, the love he and Emily shared, was the only thing that could stop Shambiria. But would their love be enough to overcome the terror that was slowly unraveling their lives? As Eden continued reading, the door to the study creaked open, and Emily stepped in. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. Eden could see that the fear wasn't just in her eyes, it was in her soul. Eden, there's something in the house. I can feel it, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Eden rushed to her side, his heart pounding. I know. I feel it too. Emily looked at the page he was holding. What does it say? Eden showed her the journal entry, his finger tracing the words as he read aloud. It says our love is the key to stopping this. But if our love falters, if it's broken, everything will be lost. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as the weight of the revelation hit her. But what if it's too late? What if we've already lost? Eden shook his head. We haven't lost yet. We still have time. As long as we're together, we have a chance. But even as he said the words, he couldn't ignore the feeling of impending doom. The house was closing in on them. Shambiria wasn't just an entity. It was a manifestation of every fear, every doubt, and every regret they had ever buried deep inside. And the more they tried to fight it, the stronger it became. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a cold wind swept through the room. Eden and Emily froze. They both heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the hallway. Shambiria was near. Without a word, Eden grabbed Emily's hand. We have to go. Now. They ran through the darkened house, but no matter where they turned, it felt like the walls were closing in. The house seemed to stretch and shift, and every corner they turned led them to another darkened hallway, another door that wouldn't open. It was as if the house itself was trapping them, playing with their minds. Finally, they reached the main foyer, but standing in the center of the room was Shambiria, its dark form twisted and distorted, its eyes glowing red. It was no longer just a shadow. It had become something else entirely, something more terrifying. You cannot escape me, Shambiria hissed, its voice echoing through the house like 1,000 whispers. Your love is weak, and I will break it. You are nothing without your fear. Eden stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, but he held his ground. We will fight you. Our love is stronger than you think. Emily stood beside him, her eyes filled with determination. We will face you together. We will never let you win. For a moment, the air was still, and then, with a terrifying screech, Shambiria lunged at them, its form swirling into a vortex of darkness. But this time they were ready. The battle for their love and their lives had only just begun. The room fell into an eerie silence after Shambiria lunged at them, its dark tendrils swirling like a storm ready to consume everything in its path. Eden and Emily stood frozen, their hearts pounding as the shadowy figure of the entity seemed to close in on them. The air was thick with tension, and the very atmosphere of the house felt suffocating. But then something unexpected happened. Emily, with a strength she didn't know she had, stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the creature in front of them. Eden felt a sudden surge of energy, a connection between them that he hadn't felt before. It was as if their love, pure and unyielding, was creating a shield, a barrier between them and Shambiria. Shambiria hissed in frustration, its form contorting as if struggling against an unseen force. You think your love can protect you? It sneered, its voice a low, guttural growl. You are weak. All love falters in the face of true fear. Eden's grip tightened around Emily's hand. Our love isn't weak, he said, his voice steady, despite the terror that gripped his heart. It's the one thing that you can never break. Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a fierce resolve. We've been through too much. You cannot destroy what we've built. With that, the energy between them seemed to intensify, a wave of warmth radiating from their hands, growing stronger with every passing second. The darkness around them began to retreat, the shadows that had once seemed so overwhelming now shrinking away like a cloud being pushed back by the sun. Shambiria recoiled, its form flickering, as if it were losing its grip on the physical realm. No, it screeched. You think this will save you? You are nothing without me. You are nothing without your fear. But Eden and Emily knew that the truth was far different. They had faced their fears, confronted the darkness within themselves, and discovered a strength that Shambiria could never comprehend. Together, they were more powerful than anything the entity could throw at them. The temperature in the room dropped sharply as Shambiria lunged again, but this time, Eden and Emily were ready. They stepped forward, their hands still tightly clasped, and in that moment, a brilliant light exploded from their hands, engulfing the room. Shambiria screeched, its form dissolving into the light, its dark shape twisting and warping as it struggled to maintain its existence. Eden could feel the creature's power waning, its hold on their lives slipping away. They had done it. They had overcome the darkness, the curse that had threatened to tear them apart. But even as Shambiria's form disintegrated, its voice echoed in the room, lingering like a whisper on the wind. You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. It hissed, its words a final warning. The darkness will always find a way back. The curse can never be fully undone. Eden and Emily stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, their hands still linked. They were both shaken, but they knew that for the moment, they had won. They had defeated the entity that had haunted them, and their love had been the key to their survival. But Shambiria's final words echoed in Eden's mind. The war was far from over. The curse might have been weakened, but it was not gone. And as long as they were in the house, the darkness would always be a threat. Eden looked at Emily, his eyes filled with determination. We've come this far. We won't let it take us now. Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. Together. Always. And so, as the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, casting a soft light across the room, Eden and Emily knew that their journey was not over. They had faced the darkness and survived. But the house still held secrets, secrets they had yet to uncover. Their love had been the weapon that drove back the curse, but it was also the key to unlocking the truth about the house and the terrifying entity that haunted it. The battle was only just beginning. As the sun rose over the horizon, the warmth of daylight filtered into the mansion, dispelling the last remnants of the night's terror. But Eden and Emily knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness had retreated, but only momentarily. The words of Shambiria, the creature that had tormented them, echoed in their minds. The war is far from over. The house, though now quiet, felt different. The air felt heavier, thick with secrets that seemed to cling to every corner. The walls, once adorned with beautiful tapestries and portraits, now felt like they were closing in on them. Eden and Emily had defeated Shambiria for now, but something told them that they hadn't seen the last of the entity. The war that Shambiria had spoken of had only just begun. As Eden paced through the main hallway, his mind racing with thoughts of what they had just endured, Emily remained by the doorway, her eyes scanning the room warily. She could feel it too, the sense that they weren't truly alone, even though there was no visible sign of danger. It was as though the very house itself was alive, watching, waiting. What do we do now? Eden asked, his voice hoarse from the tension. How do we stop this once and for all? Emily's gaze remained fixed on the shadows in the corners of the room. She could feel the presence of something dark lingering just beyond the walls, like a predator lurking in the darkness. I don't know, she admitted softly. But we can't leave until we find a way. Shambiria's words, they didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The air grew colder, and Emily shivered, despite the heat of the morning sun. Her skin prickled, and she instinctively reached out for Eden's hand. He took it without hesitation, but the coldness of his skin startled her. He too felt it. The darkness was not gone. It was only hiding, biding its time. We need to uncover the truth about this house, Eden said, determination in his eyes. We need to know what's behind all of this, what keeps bringing the darkness back. Emily nodded. We've only scratched the surface. We need to find out what happened here, why this house is cursed. The couple began to search through the mansion, moving from room to room, looking for any clue that could explain the horrors they had experienced. The mansion, with its grand architecture and lavish decorations, seemed to mock them with its silence. The once gleaming floors now creaked under their feet as they ventured deeper into the heart of the house. Finally, they stumbled upon a hidden door in the library. It was almost imperceptible, tucked away behind a large bookshelf, but Eden's sharp eyes had caught the faint outline of a secret passage. Without hesitation, they pushed the shelf aside, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into the darkness below. This is it, Eden whispered, his voice barely audible in the heavy silence. This is where it all started. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended into the depths of the mansion, the air growing colder with each step. It was as if the house was alive, its very foundations shifting beneath their feet, pulling them deeper into its secrets. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a dark stone chamber. The walls were lined with ancient symbols and carvings, some of which looked disturbingly familiar. Emily's heart raced as she recognized the markings. Symbols that seemed to match the ones she had seen in her dreams, the ones that had been connected to Shambiria's curse. Eden stepped forward, his hand brushing against the cold stone. This is it. This is where Shambiria's power comes from. As they explored the room, they found an altar at its center, covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked ancient, as if it hadn't been touched in centuries. But the moment they approached it, a low hum filled the air, and the room seemed to shift. The shadows in the corners deepened, and the temperature dropped even further. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and a voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that was not their own. "Welcome, Eden and Emily," the voice crooned, its tone sickly sweet. "I have been waiting for you." Eden's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. The shadows on the walls seemed to writhe as the voice spoke again. "I am not done with you yet. You think you have won, but the darkness will always return. The curse is eternal, and you cannot escape it. Emily stepped closer to the altar, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the surface. As soon as her fingers brushed against it, a vision flooded her mind. Flashes of a long-forgotten ritual, dark figures performing sacrifices in the very chamber they stood in. She saw herself and Eden, their faces twisted in terror as they were bound to the altar, their souls entwined in the curse that had started long ago. "Eden," Emily whispered, her voice strained. "We are part of something much bigger than we ever imagined. This house, it's not just haunted. It's the source of all the darkness. The curse was created here, and we were meant to be part of it." Eden clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with anger. "No, we will break it. We have to. For us, for everyone." But the voice only laughed, its tone mocking. "You cannot break what was never meant to be broken. You are merely pawns in a game that was set long before your arrival." The shadows surged, and the altar began to glow with an eerie light. A cold wind howled through the chamber, and the ground beneath them shook violently. It was as if the entire house was waking up, ready to swallow them whole. "We have to stop it," Eden said urgently, grabbing Emily's hand. "We need to destroy the altar. Destroy whatever is fueling this darkness." But as they moved toward the altar, the ground cracked open beneath their feet, and the chamber was flooded with darkness. They were falling deeper into the heart of the curse, into a world where reality and nightmare were one. Eden and Emily found themselves standing at the threshold of a room that felt colder and darker than any place they had been before. The walls, made of ancient stone, were covered with moss, and the air felt thick, as if something was watching them from the shadows. They stepped forward cautiously, their hearts pounding in their chests. Every step they took echoed through the silence, amplifying their fear. Eden turned to Emily. "Are you sure this is the right place?" he whispered, though his voice trembled. Emily nodded, though her face was pale. "It has to be. We have no other choice now." They walked deeper into the room, the strange light that illuminated the space casting long shadows on the walls. Suddenly, Eden froze. There, in the center of the room, was a door, old and weathered but strangely inviting. A faint glow seemed to emanate from the cracks between the wooden planks. Without saying a word, Eden approached the door and placed his hand on the cold surface. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Emily strained her ears, and after a moment she nodded. It's coming from behind the door." Eden hesitated, then pushed the door open. The moment he did, an overwhelming force pushed them both backward, throwing them to the floor. Suddenly, everything went black. When Eden and Emily regained consciousness, they found themselves in a place that felt eerily unfamiliar. The room they had entered was no longer visible. Instead, they were surrounded by a vast, suffocating darkness. The air was thick with a stifling weight, as though the very atmosphere was pulling them into an abyss from which there would be no return. Eden slowly opened his eyes, the dull ache in his head reminding him of the violent force that had thrown them across the room. As he sat up, he could feel the coldness creeping through his body, and the unsettling silence enveloped him like a thick fog. Emily was beside him, her pale face reflecting the fear and confusion that consumed them both. "What just happened?" Eden whispered, his voice shaking as he tried to make sense of their surroundings. Emily looked around, her breath shallow. I don't know. This place, it's not real. It can't be." Before Eden could respond, a faint, flickering light appeared in the distance. It was the only source of illumination in the vast darkness. The two of them exchanged uneasy glances, but the choice was clear. They had to move forward. Taking cautious steps, they made their way toward the flickering light, each step feeling heavier than the last. The silence was maddening, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the faint echo of their footsteps. As they approached the source of the light, they realized that it wasn't just a small, comforting glow, it was a doorway. A wooden door, old and weathered, stood before them, its edges glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Eden reached out and placed his hand on the door, feeling the cold wood beneath his fingers. The moment his touch made contact, a strange vibration ran through his body, as though the door was alive. He stepped back, his heart racing. "Emily, I don't know if we should open it," Eden said, his voice barely a whisper. He could feel an intense, unnatural energy emanating from the door, something far beyond their understanding. Emily, however, was already standing in front of it. Her eyes were wide with an unfamiliar determination. "We have no choice," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. This is the only way out. Before Eden could protest, she pushed the door open. The moment it creaked open, a wave of cold air rushed toward them, throwing them both backward. The room around them began to distort, and everything seemed to shift in a dizzying blur. The world they once knew seemed to dissolve into the darkness, and they fell into an abyss, surrounded by a deafening roar that made their ears ring. When they finally regained their bearings, they realized they were no longer in the room they had entered. The walls, if you could call them walls, stretched infinitely in all directions, disappearing into a void of darkness. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp, and the air felt thick with the scent of decay. "What is this place?" Eden asked, his voice trembling. I think we've entered something beyond our world," Emily replied, her eyes darting around as though expecting something to jump out at them. This is where it all started. This is the heart of the curse." Eden's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. "The curse? What do you mean?" Emily took a deep breath, her face pale. "This place isn't just a room. It's the source of everything. The reason we're here, the reason everything has gone wrong. It's where the curse began, and where it will end." Suddenly, a voice, low and guttural, echoed through the darkness. It wasn't coming from any one direction, but from everywhere. "Welcome to the end," the voice boomed. Eden's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Emily, but she was staring ahead, her eyes wide with fear. Who is that?" he asked, barely able to speak. The voice seemed to laugh, a sound that echoed through their bones, sending chills down their spines. "I am the one who has always watched over you," the voice continued. "You cannot escape the path you've chosen. The darkness is inevitable." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The symbols on the floor that they had noticed earlier began to glow brighter, flashing in a strange, rhythmic pattern. The very air around them seemed to hum with power, and Eden could feel a weight pressing on his chest, suffocating him. "I told you," the voice spoke again. "You can't escape what you've unleashed." A shadowy figure appeared in the distance. It was tall, too tall, and its movements were slow, deliberate, as though it was approaching them from all sides at once. Its form was indistinct, shifting in and out of focus, as if it wasn't bound by the rules of reality. Eden and Emily stepped back in unison, but the figure kept coming, its glowing eyes fixed on them with an intensity that felt suffocating. It reached out, its long, dark fingers twitching. "We've been expecting you," the voice said, this time much closer. "The curse cannot be undone. You've entered my domain now." Eden's breath caught in his throat. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. The figure laughed again, this time in a deep, resonant tone that seemed to shake the very air around them. "What do I want? I want you to face the truth. The truth about what you've done. The truth about yourselves." With a sudden movement, the figure lunged toward them, its eyes glowing even brighter. Emily screamed as she grabbed Eden's arm, pulling him back as the figure seemed to engulf them both in its shadow. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. Then a cold, cold wind swept through the space, and they found themselves standing in a different place. Far darker, far colder, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. "We are not safe," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "We never were." Eden looked around frantically, but there was no escape. The figure was gone, but its presence lingered in the air like a heavy fog. They were trapped, and the terror of it all was just beginning. The coldness in the air became unbearable as Eden and Emily stood in the darkness. The oppressive silence that surrounded them felt almost suffocating, making each breath a struggle. Their surroundings were no longer recognizable. The walls, if they could even be called that, seemed to shift and pulse with a strange energy, like living things, watching them with a hunger they couldn't comprehend. The once familiar world was now a distant memory, lost in the shadows of this twisted reality. Eden tried to shake off the creeping dread that clung to him, but the weight of the situation bore down harder with every passing second. The voice that had haunted them before now echoed in his mind, the chilling words like a taunt, daring him to understand. "Is this real?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, her hand trembling as she reached for Eden's. Her eyes were wide with terror, searching the shadows for any sign of life. "We've been here before, haven't we?" Eden's heart pounded. "No, this can't be the same place. This feels different." But deep down, he knew Emily was right. Something about this place was all too familiar, as if they had been here countless times before, trapped in an endless loop, a cycle from which they could not escape. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a low growl, a sound that rumbled through the air and vibrated deep in their bones. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the walls seemed to close in on them. A dark figure appeared at the far end of the room, its shape slowly becoming clearer in the dim light. It was tall, impossibly tall, and as it stepped forward, the darkness around it seemed to pulse with each movement, like it was feeding off the fear that radiated from Eden and Emily. They tried to move, to run, but their legs felt as if they were cemented to the floor. The figure continued to approach, its eyes glowing with an unearthly intensity. Eden could feel his breath catch in his throat as the figure grew closer. Its face was nothing more than a twisted mass of shadows, eyes that glowed with malevolent power, and a mouth that stretched too wide, as if it could consume everything in its path. "You've come far," the voice rumbled, though the figure itself did not speak. The sound seemed to come from all around them, from the walls, the air, and the very ground beneath their feet. "We didn't ask for this," Emily cried, her voice breaking as she clutched Eden's arm. "We don't belong here." The figure's lips twisted into what might have been a smile. "You never did. You came here willingly. You opened the door to this place. And now you must face the consequences." Eden's pulse quickened. "We didn't open anything. We didn't choose this," he shouted, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. The figure stepped closer, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. The air was thick with something malignant, something ancient that clung to them like a fog. "You think you're innocent?" the voice mocked. "You think you're here by accident? Your choices brought you here. The truth you've been running from will catch up to you. It always does." Suddenly, the walls began to distort once again. They were no longer solid, no longer just stone or wood. They seemed to melt, as though the very fabric of reality itself was unraveling. Eden could feel his mind stretching, being pulled in different directions, as if his very thoughts were being torn apart. In the distance, a door appeared, a familiar door. It looked like the one they had first opened, the one that had led them into this nightmare. The door flickered, then slowly began to close, as if mocking them for their failure to escape. Emily's eyes filled with desperation. "We need to get to that door. Now!" she cried, trying to pull Eden toward it. But as they moved toward the door, the figure moved with them. It was everywhere, its presence filling the space like a thick, suffocating fog. Every step they took seemed to be met with resistance, as if the very air was fighting against them. Eden gripped Emily's hand tighter, his heart racing as they drew closer to the door. They could hear the growling sound again, louder this time, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The walls were closing in on them, and time seemed to stretch, bending and twisting with every moment. "We can't make it," Eden whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "It's too late." Emily's eyes were wide with terror, but she didn't stop moving. "We can't give up now. We've come too far." As they reached the door, the figure appeared directly in front of them, blocking their path. Its eyes glowed brighter now, and the shadows around it seemed to form into hands, reaching out for them. "No one escapes," the voice hissed, a promise of doom. "You're mine now." Eden and Emily stood frozen, their bodies trembling as they faced the figure, knowing that the door was now only a few feet away. But the darkness around them was closing in, and with each passing second, it felt like they were sinking deeper into an abyss that would swallow them whole. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, the door slammed open on its own. A bright light poured out from it, pushing back the shadows and illuminating the room in a blinding brilliance. The figure screeched, recoiling from the light, but it didn't vanish. It remained, watching them with burning intensity. Emily, without hesitation, pulled Eden toward the door. "Now! We have to go now!" Together, they ran toward the light, the figure's cries echoing in their ears. The closer they got to the door, the more the figure's form seemed to blur, as if it couldn't exist in the presence of the light. They didn't stop, didn't dare look back until they were finally through the door. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. The dark, suffocating atmosphere disappeared, and the silence was replaced by the sound of rushing wind. The light around them grew brighter, warmer. They could feel the weight lifting from their shoulders, the crushing pressure easing. But as they stood there, gasping for breath, Eden realized something that sent a chill down his spine. The door was gone. They were trapped again. And somewhere, in the darkness, the figure was still watching. Eden's heart pounded in his chest as he stared into the endless void before him. The door had vanished the moment they stepped through it, and now they were in a place that felt both familiar and foreign. The cold, unrelenting darkness seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. There were no walls, no ceiling, no ground beneath their feet, just an infinite abyss that seemed to swallow everything whole. It was as if they had fallen into the very heart of the nightmare, a place where time had no meaning and space had no definition. Emily stood beside him, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She clutched his arm tightly, her fingers cold as ice. "Eden," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this place? Where are we?" Eden didn't have an answer. The confusion and fear that gripped his mind were overwhelming. He wanted to believe that they had escaped, that they were finally free, but deep down, he knew that it was far from over. The darkness was alive, and it was watching them, waiting. The air seemed to hum with a low, vibrating sound that filled their ears and rattled their bones. A chill ran down Eden's spine as the shadows around them began to stir. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel something shifting, moving in the depths of the darkness. Then a voice. The same voice that had haunted them throughout their journey. The voice that had promised them doom. "You think you're safe?" The voice growled, low and menacing. "You think you've escaped me?" The sound seemed to come from every direction, surrounding them, suffocating them. Eden's breath hitched, his pulse racing as he glanced around, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. But there was nothing but the oppressive darkness, pressing in on them from all sides. "No!" Emily shouted, stepping forward with determination in her eyes. "We won't let you win. We're not afraid anymore." Eden turned to her, shock and disbelief on his face. "Emily, don't. You don't know what you're dealing with. This thing, it's not human." "It's not." But Emily's eyes were fixed ahead, her gaze unwavering. "It doesn't matter what it is. We've come this far, and we're not backing down. Not now." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted, and a dark, twisted form began to materialize before them. It was the figure, the one that had tormented them throughout their ordeal. Its shape was even more monstrous now, its body towering over them like a nightmare come to life. Its eyes glowed with an unholy intensity, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "You are nothing," the figure hissed. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can run from the truth?" Eden's heart raced as the figure's presence grew stronger, its dark energy radiating outward, pushing against him. He could feel it. This wasn't just a physical fight. This was something deeper, something primal. The figure was feeding off their fear, and with each passing second, it grew stronger, more powerful. "No!" Eden shouted, stepping forward. "We're done running. You don't control us anymore." The figure's laughter echoed in the darkness, a cruel, mocking sound that seemed to shatter the air around them. "You are fools. You've already lost." The darkness swirled around them, and Eden could feel his strength draining away. The shadows seemed to pull at his very soul, trying to consume him. But then something inside him snapped. The fear, the doubt, it all melted away in that moment. He realized that the figure wasn't just an external force. It was a manifestation of everything they had feared, everything they had tried to escape. It was the truth they had been running from. He turned to Emily, who was standing beside him, her face pale but determined. "Emily," he said, his voice steady for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "This is it. This is where we face it. We have to confront it together. It's the only way." Emily nodded, her eyes full of courage. "We can do this. We've been through worse. This isn't the end." The figure sneered, its form warping and shifting in the darkness. "You cannot defeat me. I am the truth. The truth you can never escape." Eden took a deep breath, his mind clear for the first time in what felt like forever. He could feel the energy building inside him, the strength he thought he had lost returning with a vengeance. The darkness may have been consuming him, but it could never take his will. It could never take his soul. Together, he and Emily stepped forward, facing the figure with newfound resolve. The air around them crackled with tension as they stood their ground, united in the face of the terror that had haunted them for so long. "Enough," Eden said, his voice rising above the darkness. "We won't be controlled by you. We won't let you define us anymore." The figure roared in fury, its monstrous form stretching and twisting, but Eden and Emily remained unfazed. They were no longer afraid. The truth was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. As they stood there, a bright light erupted from within them, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The figure screeched, its form disintegrating as the light grew brighter and brighter. The darkness began to dissipate, retreating into the corners of the abyss. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the darkness was gone. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the light was all that remained. Eden and Emily stood in the center of it, breathing heavily but alive, their hearts filled with a sense of peace they had never known before. They had faced their fears. They had faced the truth. And they had won. As the light faded, the silence was deafening. For a long moment, Eden and Emily stood in the center of the now peaceful void, their minds still trying to grasp the enormity of what had just occurred. They were no longer surrounded by the endless darkness, no longer battling the terrifying entity that had haunted them. All that remained was a sense of stillness, an eerie calm that seemed to stretch into eternity. Eden turned to Emily, his heart still racing, his thoughts swirling with questions. He had expected victory, but now that it was over, there was a strange emptiness inside him. The darkness was gone, but so was the fear that had driven him for so long. He was free, but what did freedom truly mean now? Emily looked at him, her face pale but resolute. There was a strength in her eyes, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She had been through the same trials, the same terror, and now she was the one who seemed to understand. It was as if the struggle they had faced had changed them both in ways they hadn't yet realized. "We did it," Emily whispered, almost as if to herself. "It's over." But Eden wasn't sure if it was. The world around them had changed, yes, but the truth they had uncovered, the truth they had faced, still lingered in the air like a heavy fog. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, that nagging sense that something was unfinished, something still unsaid. He turned to Emily, his voice low. "But what now? What happens to us?" Emily shook her head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't know. But we're alive. We've made it through the worst. And whatever comes next, we face it together." Eden didn't have an answer to that. His mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. The fear, the uncertainty, the monstrous figure that had threatened to consume them. All of it seemed so distant now, like a nightmare fading with the first light of dawn. But deep down, he knew something important. The terror they had faced was not just external. It was a reflection of the struggles they had carried within themselves. The fear, the guilt, the pain, those were the true monsters they had battled. The entity they had confronted was merely a manifestation of their own unresolved emotions, their hidden truths. And now, with the darkness gone, they were left with themselves. With each other. "We've faced the worst," Eden said, his voice steady now, as if he had finally come to terms with everything. "And we've won. But the real journey, it's only just beginning." Emily nodded, her gaze softening. "We don't need to be afraid anymore. We've survived the darkness. We can rebuild, one step at a time." Eden smiled, the weight lifting from his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace, of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs to walk. Together. Suddenly, a soft, warm light appeared before them, shimmering with a gentle glow. It was as if the universe itself was offering them a path forward. The void had given way to something new, something brighter. Eden and Emily stepped toward the light, their hands clasped together, their hearts aligned with the promise of a new beginning. The terror, the pain, and the darkness had all been left behind, and now they were free to create a future without fear, without regret. The journey they had begun was far from over. But in this moment, they knew that they were stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. And as they walked into the light, they understood something crucial. The true victory wasn't defeating the darkness around them. It was embracing the truth within, finding peace with their past, and stepping into the future together. You enjoyed our story. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel Night Howl. Don't forget to hit the bell icon after subscribing, so you get notified whenever we upload our next terrifying tale. Did you enjoy our story? Let us know in the comments what part scared you the most. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends. And yes, if there's a particular topic you want us to cover in our next story, drop your suggestions in the comments. Thank you for watching our video. If you want more spine-chilling tales, subscribe now so you never miss an upload.